Okay, this is a talk about code switching, which is fairly easy. Code switching doesn't really concern codes, it usually concerns languages or, in general, varieties. And it talks about the movement between varieties, usually within a conversation. We're not talking about loan words, about the use of one isolated word. It's usually at phrase level and above that the switching occurs. And we're not talking about bilingual conversations, about me speaking English and somebody else replying in Spanish and me speaking English. Code switching is when the one speaker moves between varieties and the other speaker may follow or may not follow. So it doesn't really concern codes as such. And switching, a good translation in Spanish, I think, is alternancia, okay, to move backwards and forwards. Types of code switching, very simple. We talk about code mixing. If there appears to be no other logic, if people are just playing with language, you get people, especially in the United States, what's called Spanglish, moving very freely between Spanish and English, and you can't see why. If there's no apparent logic, we'll call it code mixing. It's all mixed up. If, however, there is a logic, we can look for it in one of two places. One place can be the use of code switching for rhetorical effect, what the textbooks call metaphorical code switching. Moving to a different variety to get an added degree of connotation or a change in power relations, etc. I used to witness wonderful metaphorical code switching in Spanish politicians, especially Felipe González, who is from Andalusia. So his first variety of Spanish is Andalusian variety. But when he was speaking in the Spanish Parliament, he would speak fairly straight, standard, statesman-like Spanish. And you would find that in his political speeches, but then he would refer to the workers and the working place because he was in the Spanish Socialist Workers' Party. And he would move to Andalusian. You would see those features, those variants of his Spanish coming out when he moved to there to get a rhetorical effect, to be able to speak at once to the workers and to the nation. He would move between at least two varieties of Spanish. That would be an example of metaphorical code switching. The other kinds refer to the situation in which code switching is used, situational code switching, and we would distinguish between addressee-based code switching, that is, you change language according to the person you're speaking to. This happens very often when I observe in the cafeteria in our university students speaking. They'll change to Catalan or to Spanish according to whether one person joins a group or if they're directing themselves just to one member of the group. That would be perhaps the most common in this particular social situation. And the other kind of situation is what's called topic-based, when you change language because the language is associated with a particular topic. I think one example given in Janet Holmes refers to Chinese students living in England. They're cooking at home, and when they're cooking, they're speaking, in this case, Cantonese, and then they go to do their homework. They're studying economics, they learn economics in English, and they switch to English for that particular topic or semantic field. So that is also common enough, depending on the social situation. The importance of code switching can be understood, I think, If we go back to one of the early definitions, a definition by Gall in 1988, where she says, code switching is a conversational strategy used to establish, cross, or destroy group boundaries, to create, evoke, or change interpersonal relations with their rights and obligations. What I particularly like here is that it's work on the boundary, to establish, cross, or destroy group boundaries. This really means that code switching can happen because our social lives are not fixed in groups that are completely separate. We can work along the boundaries, work to define them, and work to undo those boundaries as well. Our lives are not constructed in terms of separate social groups or separate social domains, nor indeed separate languages, nor indeed separate cultures. That is why code switching undoes all the assumptions that say we only have one language, or language is a culture, or such and such is always done in one language. It shows that the boundaries, the social boundaries that we live with, and the cultural and the linguistic boundaries are thick. One can work in and on those boundaries. Now I'd like to make a series of quick points about code switching and why it's of particular interest to me. First, there is a lot of it, especially here. We live in a community where there are 2 or 3 languages at play. We live in Catalonia, there's lots of Spanish spoken, and we're in a university where English has a very significant presence as well. And there is lots and lots of code switching all over the place. In virtually all situations that we have within this university, code switching can occur. Second, there's a lot of it, and it's fairly stable. People can and do use it all the time to play with language, to get rhetorical effects, to play with the differences between languages, to manifest their identity. It's done in many, many, many cultural situations, and it doesn't destroy cultures, and it doesn't destroy languages. It's been happening for centuries, and there's no evidence that it has particularly destructive force. In fact, there's lots of evidence that it's a creative force. It's being used more and more frequently in literature, in post-colonial literature especially, undoing the illusions of literature in just one language or just one culture. As such, it goes against the ideologies of immersion, that you have to go entirely into one language in order to understand it. People are not living their lives just in one language. They're living their lives using and creating the boundaries between languages. Now, code switching is one of the fundamental things that can happen when languages are in contact. The others would be using language A or language B, using a lingua franca, often English, an international language, using translation, using code switching as we mentioned, and the other one is what some people, Umberto Eco, and Claude Agege propose, a bilingual conversation, where, I mentioned this at the beginning, one person speaks their language, the other person speaks the other language, and we just have to know enough of the other language to have a passive understanding. And this is presented sometimes as a model of conversations within a multilingual society. We just have to learn enough languages to understand what the other person is saying, and we can speak our language. Now, my observations in the limited number of places where I've lived and worked are that bilingual conversations hardly ever occur. They can occur when there's highly regulated codification of languages, but for the rest, what we mostly find is code switching, either code mixing, situational, or metaphorical code switching. There's lots of it. We should pay lots of attention to it.